Hi Year 12, I hope you are well and keeping safe. For today's lesson, I want us to focus on the difference between lab and field experiments in psychology. And this is on page 186 to 187. I need you to have a read of this spread, and using your research methods workbook on page 29, you've got a nice structure for how I want your notes to look. So it's either you transfer your notes into the workbook directly or you have separate notes, is absolutely fine. But make sure that you've got a thorough definition of a lab experiment and a field experiment, and you've also mentioned their strengths and their weaknesses in your notes as well. And I'll show you where you can find these in the research methods textbook. So you would go to where it's got key terms, very thorough and detailed definitions here for field experiments and lab experiments. And on page 187, you have the strengths and the limitations for lab experiments and also the same for field experiments. And then I want to encourage you to take part in a support task. So to start off with, you've got the apply your knowledge section here, and you've got a list of studies here, a little description of the studies that have taken place. Now, for those of you who are finding research methods a little bit tricky, you can have a go at this very light task, which is in the research methods workbook on page 30. And just to start off with, have a go at identifying whether or not the study is a lab or a field experiment and justify your choice. For those of you who are desiring a little bit more of a challenge, I would suggest that you pick 2 studies, or maybe 1 study to start off with, for which you will answer all of these 8 questions on that particular study. Yeah. So if I quickly just talk through study A as an example, it says Bushman tested the effects of perceived authority on obedience. A female researcher dressed either in a police style uniform as a business executive or as a beggar stopped people in the street and told them to give change to a male researcher for an expired parking meter. People obeyed most when she was in the police uniform, whereas obedience rates were much lower than the other 2 conditions. When interviewed afterwards, people claimed they had obeyed the woman in uniform because she appeared to have authority. So that's a little synopsis of the study. They're asking you for number 1 to identify the independent variable and the dependent variable. So in this particular study, the independent variable is the woman's attire was being changed. So it was either she was dressed in a police style uniform, business executive, or a beggar. So those are 3 levels of the independent variable. And the thing that was being measured was people's obedience. But how did we operationalize obedience in this study? It was measured as to whether they actually gave the change to the male researcher or not. Yeah, so that's the operationalization of the dependent variable. Was a task required of participants contrived? So you're going to have to do some reading here to understand what we mean by contrived. I'm not going to give it away to you yet, but think contrived, think controlled as well. Was the study conducted in a natural setting? Well, in this study, clearly they're on the street, so it's a natural setting. Was the setting high or low in mundane realism? Well, the more realistic it is, the higher it is in mundane realism. So we would say it's high in mundane realism. Did the participants know they were being studied? Well, in this observational design, the participants were unaware that they were being used for a piece of research, so therefore they weren't aware that they were being studied. So you can see how you can answer each of those questions. So I would suggest pick 1 and go through all 8 just to show your knowledge and understanding. If you're struggling with that task, then you can simply go through all of these studies, so studies A to F, and simply identify whether or not the study was a lab or field experiment and just justify your choice. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense. I hope it's easy breezy and nice for you guys to do. Research methods is quite straightforward, and I'm proud of the work that you guys are doing so far. So well done. If you have any questions, just holler at me, just message me on Show My Homework, or send me an email if you need some clarification.